Hey, how's it going? All right, so the goal of this lesson is to basically prevent you to stop using print statements. I think that's the aim I tend to achieve today, right? So yeah, quickly we'll get right into it. Right, first of all, I've seen lots of people try to debug, but the way they debug is a little bit hilarious, right? And it's actually like using constant.log in a JavaScript environment. When a Python environment, this is very common, right? It's a very common thing, right? So they do this, put it wherever they want to put it. But today, I don't think from when you're done with this particular lesson, you will actually stop using print statements. Right, so first of all, where do we start up? So first, for you to be able to achieve this, you need to have some sort of editor, right? So we're actually testing this out in the VS Code editor. You could actually use other editors as well, but just for the scope of this lesson, is we're actually using VS Code. And secondly, you need to have an app initiator. Basically, I refer to this as an app initiator. It's this particular script that initiates your app. So this is our app. So we basically have this script that runs it. So when I call this script, this app is supposed to run automatically. So that's the basis, that's the point of we trying to have the run.py file. You notice that the create app itself is coming from the server, server file, right? But then we have an extra run file to basically run the server on our behalf. So you actually need this file. And when you're done, you basically need to create a .vs code folder if you don't have it, right? Then in this folder, the only file you're interested in is a launch.json. So I'm going to actually cover the rest up real quick. And just to mention, this is actually applicable for those using Flask and Fast API. I think it's actually applicable for those using Django. Just anything that has to do with like Python ecosystem, basically. So you can actually use this to run it. All right, so I've actually added a link here. It's more of the convention. So basically I have a link here. You can go through this link. Shows you how to, how each of these properties basically come into the picture and how each of them works. So I actually leave a link, not really a link, it's actually within the code. If you want to check it out, you can basically check the comment within the code and you have access to the link. All right, so first of all, we need to set up our configurations, which is very important. So you need to give your script runner a name. So we can actually call it Taskmaster app. And meanwhile, you can call this anything, right? So while the naming convention is actually important is, for example, you have numerous app runners, for different ecosystems, for different workspaces. So you just have to name it appropriately so that you can be able to know, oh, this is the taskmaster runner. So now, keep your eyes on the sidebar here, right? So we have the run and debug. Go click on that button. So we have the taskmaster app. This is because we actually named this the taskmaster app. You can name this anything. Godfather, right? So by default, it's going to actually change that to the name you placed in here. So it's just a way for you to be able to identify your script, right? So go in here and we just undo it to Taskmaster app, which is much more appropriate, right? So then we have the type Python, and meanwhile, when you hover each of this name, you get to see what each of them, basically does, right? So now what we are concerned about here is the module and then the Flask app. This is actually for the case of a Flask app, though. So if it's actually for a what's it called, for a Fast API app, you basically have to use So I think that's how it's pronounced for some weird reason. Very difficult thing. UVCon. So basically, you can actually use this if you're using the Fast API and so on and so forth, right? So good. So we basically have what we're concerned about here is a module and then the actual file. So then module is basically how you target the file name, basically. So the module can actually be replaced with program. Program now is actually like a token guest because most of the time program is actually OS specific. If you're using some sorts of Windows, for example, you have to specify your program. Right, you specify your program, and then you have to create some sort of path to, this is actually the path to your, your virtual environment, your .env. So that's why it's actually like, and then you basically have to target, I think, scripts, and finally you have some sort of activate, right, or Flask. So since that's actually your main runner. So, but then this flask.exe is an executable. So this will not work in a Mac environment. So that's why you should try as much as possible to use, a kind of logic that is actually OS not dependent. So it doesn't depend on any OS. Basically, it works across, all operating systems. So that's why we're using module today, right? So the module we have now is the run, so which is targeting this run.py file. So in this run file, we basically have a place for us to basically instantiate our app and be able to run it. So go back to our launch.json, and then we basically have to specify the actual name of the app, which is run.py. So you just have it here, run.py. And meanwhile, if you're calling this xx or whatever, you call this xx as well. So you basically have to rename this file to that same name, which is xxxx into 5 places, I think, right? So we just undo it. So we're using run for this tutorial. And then now this is something that I basically have to take a note at, right? So now immediately you actually click on the start icon, you instantiate your app basically. So you're going to actually watch your terminal and you say do all these stuff for you. So you're going to instantiate your app and it's going to run your app. Yeah, our app is running. So you can basically click on this and it's going to redirect you to the root, to the root URL basically. So you have access to this and then we're good to debug, right? So in this particular lesson, I'm going to actually be showing you guys a couple of things, right? There are some areas that are extremely important here, right? So the variable tab is extremely important. You have to take a note of this basically. And then you have your terminal. Well, you're going to be using this much less anyways, but then this is where you see what's going on basically. And then you basically have the debug console, right? So the debug console. Debug console is extremely high level, and this is where we'll be debugging most of the things that we are interested in. So the variables tab, the debug console, and then your terminal are extremely important layers we'll be taking a look at in a moment. All right, so I'll clean this up, and yeah, we'll basically have a code, and then we'll try to basically log in. Let me try to log in to make sure everything is working as expected. Good. We just logged in. And copy this token. Okay, we didn't copy it properly. Grab this, stop there. So go to our task master app. So we can actually put it within this here. We can actually put this in a global variable. Depends on how you want to achieve it. Doesn't really matter. Yeah, so for some reason I lost track of that. So let me copy it again and put it within the taskmaster app. Paste, then just save it, right? Then we're good to go. We now have access to our token, and then when we'll try to fetch the user, we have access to the user. Great, right? So now we want to debug this API /user/users. How do we go about that? That's the next thing we'll be considering. So go to the code, and then we have a route, and then we have the user route. And then we have, get user, I think. Yeah, get user. This get user is being controlled by the get user controller. You can go into there and here, very good, right? So we basically have this. So all you have to do is basically set breakpoints, right? So where you actually set breakpoint depends on, where you want to if I set breakpoints in line 93, I'm going to be getting access to current user ID, the user, and then the user dictionary. Right. So, but if I put it right, maybe at the top here, I'm going to be getting access to just the current user ID, and then it's going to stop at this particular. It's going to break per se at this particular point. Right. So let's test this out. So I click on send, enter. So you can see that our code now is post. So Postman by default is still stuck in this loop of trying to connect, but it's going to be there until we process our debugging basically. So I'm going to close this real quick. We don't need this for now. And yeah, I'm going to close that real quick. All right. So we can see that from here, we don't need to do, for example, we don't know if the current user is actually coming through. We don't need to do print current user ID. We already have it within our variables part right here. So I think by default, we don't need the callback. We don't need the breakpoint. We don't need the watch. We just need access to the variables. So you can see this is actually your local variables. You still have access to your global variables if you want. So these are actually variables declared, I think, in the server.py file, right? So you can't forget about this. We're more concerned about these local variables. So immediately so here we have a little icon. I don't know if you guys can see it. is actually, it helps you with your debugging. Basically, we have the continue, we have the step over, we have the step into, we have the step out, and then we have the restart, and then we have the stop, right? So what each of them, perform actually vary. So if, for example, I want to step over, I want to go from user to maybe user dictionary, I can just click on the step over icon, click on that. It's going to, take us to user dictionary, and I'm going to click on that as well. So the more I step over, the more I have access to the variables within the variables section right here, right? So now I have access to current user ID, user, and then the user dictionary, which is a great thing to have, right? So, and then when you are done with the entire thing, you can just click on this continue. Click on this continue is going to, skip it to the very end and just process your request as normal. So I'm going to minimize this now. Merely I click on this, it's going to process the request. See, it's still loading. So I'll click on this right away. You can see the request went through successfully, right? So that's actually one great way to debug. So right now I'm going to show you one key example, but this has to do with stepping into, right? So I'm going to place this actually in the login user controller, which is actually the login API. So I put a breakpoint right here. So then by default, I'm going to be having access to JSON data, the params for some weird reason, email, password, user, everything here. I'm going to be having access to them within our variables tab, right? So I'm going to do that real quick. And just to mention, our breakpoint is right here, right? Good. So this is actually in the login controller. So I go to the login user, then click on send. So our breakpoint was able to detect it. And as I said, we have access to all the variables right there. So you can see we have the email, we have the JSON data right here. Like open it up, you have access to all the values coming right through. So params is the one I just put in here arbitrarily, right? Just to demonstrate how it works. So even the params, the variables, the values from the params will be shown or detected, by your debugger by default, right? So that's it. So we have the user here, the user ID here, right? So you have it here. So everything will actually be spelled out for you within this particular console, right? So, and then the more you go, the more you actually have access to all of this. Byte hashed password. Look at the byte hashed password right there. And then now we actually see one cool thing. We have the create access token. Now, what makes this extremely important is the fact that create access token is actually a custom function. I'll show you guys real quick. Not really. It's actually a function coming from Flask GWT extended. Okay, yeah. So I'm not going to use that to depict it because I want our own function. So I'm going to step over to success response. Success response is actually our own custom function. I'm going to show you guys where it's been imported. Here, you can see here, we have API handlers response. So I'm going to open it real quick. You can see that it's actually a custom function that has a bit of things coming in. It has some parameters like data, message, and status code. And also it still has some sorts of dictionaries well stated right here, right? So this is what actually processes our responses. So the major focus of this is it processes only success responses, not error responses, right? So we can go back real quick and basically show you how that works. So now, for us to be able to use a step into, right, it's very easy. So if you want to go into this function, you want your debugger to basically go into this function, you can just click on step into. Good. So you can actually notice that we moved away from actually testing out the initial breakpoint. So we're now in the success response ecosystem. Now we have access to all the params coming right in. We have access to the data, right? Data basically has access token, I think, and it has user ID. So what's coming in here? Actually, data access token and the user ID is just an object. That's what we are seeing. And then we have the message sources. And then finally, we have the status code. So, right. So in here, you can keep stepping into. This will just keep moving it from one stage to another, basically, right? So mainly you step into this stage, you already have access to your response. So you can see response right here, right? So basically, this is your response. This is the data, I think. So data will have some sort of response and whatever, right? So it gives you a lot of bunch of some stupid stuff that you might not really need, right? So But what's actually important is that you have access to your result, right? Result is something that you want to display out. So this is our result. This is the meta and this is the data. So the meta now has the status code and then the message, and then the data basically has the access token and then the user ID. Impressive, right? So if you don't want it anymore, you can just step into it and probably use the step out function, which I didn't use, but that's another alternative you can use. You can step out of that function. So this will take you back to where you were actually coming from, which is actually the login user controller, right? So now, basically, since we are done with the entire thing, we can just click on this. We have access, we can debug. If there's an error, we can just grab them all within here. You can click on here for it to process. But before I click on here, I'm going to show you guys how to use the debug console, right? So we want to minimize the terminal real quick. So I want to drag this to the top, which is extremely important. We'll minimize the terminal, which is not needed at this stage. And then we have to maximize the debug console. So now, VS Code by default gives you access to be able to interact with the variables within within your debugging system, right? So now, if for example, I can come in here and say email, right? So there's actually some sort of autocomplete. I don't know if I can zoom this in, right? Okay, good. I think, yeah, you guys can see it more this way. So you can actually see there's some sort of autocomplete. As the email, click on it, email, enter. So you have access to your email. This is a very cool way to debug as well, right? So if, for example, I just need my JSON data, I just say JSON data. So there's autocomplete by default. You click on it, and then you have access to your JSON data. So by default, the things that JSON data is giving to you is your email and then the password, right? Which is an object or a dictionary in the Python language, right? Great. So that's the way you can basically debug, right? You have, maybe I need a user ID. You can have that. So click on it, and then you have access to a user ID, right? So I don't think there's any function here, but if there are functions, you can still call them within here. So by default, you have access to literally anything you need. User dictionary, which is right here. You can just click on it, and you have access to the user dictionary. The user dictionary basically has the ID, then the full name, then the email. Right, so I think that's basically it. I don't want to make this tutorials too long, right? Yeah, thank you guys for joining in. Catch you on the next one.